The Edmonton Oilers dropped their sixth of their last seventh games tonight, falling 6-2 to the Anaheim Ducks in a game that started off great and spiraled very, very quickly. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, stages of grief, I think, is how I would aptly describe this episode. We'll start with the game itself, why the game was rigged from the start. We'll move along. We'll hit on why it feels like the goaltending conversation is reaching deafening levels of audio volume at this point. And we'll tie a bow on this episode talking about why it feels like things are spiraling so dramatically. So, I don't know if you guys know this or not about me. If you follow me on social, you might know I do enjoy video games. I am quite the video game person. I always have been since I was a little kid. One of the great games I've played in my life, and it's a AAA mainstream. So if you're an indie person, don't roll your eyes at me talking about Fallout New Vegas. But that game starts with your character, the protagonist, being given a task to deliver something to another person. You're being tasked to deliver a good. It doesn't matter what the MacGuffin is. I'm not getting too deep into the plot of the game, but that game starts with your character in a cutscene being on his way to deliver the MacGuffin, the platinum chip, and getting intercepted by people trying to steal it. And the person who intercepts you brings you to a graveyard. They have you looking at your grave, and the guy, before he tries to unalive you, he says, "It's not your fault. The game was rigged from the start." And when you have AHL goaltending like the Oilers did tonight, the game was very much rigged from the start. And it sucks because the Oilers, when they have scored first, generally speaking, have been very good. Tonight was, I want to say, the seventh time all year they've lost when they've scored first in a game. That's not yeah. They were 21-6-4 when scoring first this year. Tonight, their seventh regulation loss all season when scoring first. And it kind of feels anticlimactic because when you're in the kind of funk the Oilers are in, look, they played well enough against Carolina over the weekend to pick up the W against a playoff team. That's something you can feel good about. But when you're mired in this type of long-range funk, and the Oilers had a 300 points percentage in the month of February, that's not going to cut it. And the Oilers are fortunate that the teams behind them in the standings throughout the Pacific Division and the Western Conference at large have largely failed to capitalize on the Oilers' struggles. The Oilers did play great hockey from mid-November through the early January, and it gave them a nice points cushion to operate out of. But for the most part, the Oilers are only in the spot they're in right now, largely because the teams behind them have failed to try and catch up. The teams behind them have failed to make a meaningful bit of headway towards them during this funk. And when you look at just the shot totals, you look at the saves, and I cannot begin to express how demoralizing it's got to be for the rest of the team. And I don't want to get too inside here because I can't speak for the 18 skaters on the team or Chris Knobloch or Stan Bowman. But when you're in a prolonged struggling stretch here, like the Oilers are, a prolonged period where your team is just every single game feels like a struggle, having your goalie give up 3 goals in 6.5 minutes has to effectively feel like being punched across the face and then being asked to continue smiling in a picture. You know, if you were posing for a picture and someone just walked up to you, socked you in the jaw, and you were expected to keep smiling, that's what it's got to feel like right now if you're on this Oilers team, because you can't trust your goaltending. And then if nobody trusts their goaltending, that creates a trickle-down effect. We talk a lot about how when structure breaks down, guys start freelancing, they start trying to improvise. That's where they start getting into trouble because different players aren't operating within structure. If everyone's doing their own thing, guys aren't where they're supposed to be. The whole mechanics of the team break down. And look, This is the National Hockey League. You can say what you want about the Ducks, the quality of their roster, the trajectory of their franchise in terms of returning to the postseason. If you come out and you give teams chances, they are going to take them. This is professional sports. I know this happens in college sports to a lesser extent, but the 55-point underdog week one that plays Alabama at Alabama, that team, no matter what Alabama does, is almost certainly losing by 8 touchdowns. In the National Hockey League, you give someone like Mason McTavish a couple chances, a Leo Carlson a couple chances, all of a sudden you're looking and it's 4-1 with 2 periods to go. And at that point, if you're Chris Knobloch, you got to feel like you were at the beach and you were just casually standing in the ocean and you got caught in a riptide and the riptide pulled you out to deep water. You're an okay swimmer, but you're struggling. You're trying to swim directly against the tide as opposed to trying to swim parallel to the beach line, getting out of that riptide. And it's really becoming an unstoppable problem. Because when you are dealing with goaltending that is this ineffective, for this prolonged, they've given up 33 goals dating back to the last game before the Four Nations face-off break against Colorado. 6 some odd goals, 4.78 goals per game, I think is what the math shook out to. I'm going to click over to my notes here real quick just to be sure. But yeah, 4.78 goals against average over their last 7 regular season games dating back to the Colorado game. You're not going to win in the NHL like that. And I think it's telling that the Oilers went 2 for 2 on the power play. They went 2 for 2 on the penalty kill, killed off every Ducks power play in this game. The Ducks were out there running a 5-forward power play unit trying to score even with the big lead. And the Oilers killed that off. You know, you go 4 for 4 on special teams across both units. Most of the time, you're going to expect to win that game. And then you go and look and you see that the Oilers had an .818 save percentage tonight between Skinner and Pickard, and nothing you can do. If you're a skater on this team, sure, you probably could have scored 1 or 2 more goals. The Oilers generated plenty of offense and had good looks. They just couldn't convert. Even if you score 4, you're still not beating 6. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but in the National Hockey League, it's about the team that scores more goals. That's the team that wins the game. The Oilers are reaching a tipping point, and they don't have a lot of time to figure out what they want to do. As I'm recording this, it just shifted from Tuesday into Wednesday. The trade deadline is Friday. There aren't a lot of goalies available. There is no silver bullet. Oh, it's Ryan Miller's last year of his contract in Buffalo. Maybe the Blues will trade for him. Or last year, where Jacob Markstrom was on a really bad Flames team and the Devils desperately needed goaltending. The Devils had the worst goaltending stats in the entire NHL. They rotated through like 7 different goalies at various points last season, and it didn't matter, and they weren't able to get Jacob Markstrom until the summer. Yeah, they traded for Jake Allen to kind of steady the position before the regular season ended last year. But if you're sitting here as a guy on that team, you can't have a lot of confidence in the team at large and your goaltending, and everybody's kind of walking on eggshells. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but eggs are kind of expensive to be walking on the shelves. We are going to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, we are going to hone in and focus this conversation around the goalies, why it's such a problem, and why the Oilers messaging through their team-friendly media tells us a lot about their view of the position. Coming up right after this, so be sure to stick around. When the game tips off, NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. Or if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature whenever I hang out with my friends because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. We love all coming to an agreement on what we want to bet on, whether it's a team trying to mount a late comeback or a player trying to hit a prop. Feels like you never really miss the game. Plus, the FanDuel app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid out instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. If you missed it, we put out a bonus episode on Tuesday breaking down the Trent Frederic trade from a variety of different perspectives. We looked at Frederic the player. We looked at when he may be able to return, what he would bring to the lineup, what it means for Evander Kane. And there's still a lot of balls up in the air between now and Friday. I think it's 4 o'clock Eastern time is the NHL trade deadline when it kicks in. So we'll see what happens between now and then. I am cautiously optimistic that the Oilers will continue to look to upgrade their roster during the intermission report. There was conjecture about, are they going to look for a right-handed defenseman, a left-handed defenseman? What do they need? And I think, and I want to be fair, I understand that team media, someone like Bob Stauffer, who works for the Oilers radio network, and the radio station is affiliated with the team has some sway, some influence over the coverage there, and they don't want to piss off their partner. And this is one of the real conundrums of major sports media in 2025 is the television networks, who ostensibly are supposed to operate as watchdogs, as checks on the powerful. They can't do that because, Bob Stauffer works for the Oilers radio network, and the Oilers radio network needs to maintain their professional relationships with the organization so that when time comes around to get that contract renewed, both sides can agree to it and they keep the can kicking down the road, if you will. And you are watching in real time a very concerted effort from team-friendly media to not put the buck on Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard. Now, I need to be fair. I myself have been very reticent to put a lot of blame on them because I don't expect a lot from them. And that might sound a bit disqualifying, making it sound like I'm talking about children, but I don't expect Stuart Skinner to be great. I don't expect Calvin Pickard to be great. The problem is the Oilers are not outscoring their problems the way they did last year. They are missing the diversity and skill set that Evander Kane, Warren Foegele, Ryan McLeod, Dylan Holloway brought to their forward group that they just don't have this year. They're lacking speed throughout especially the bottom half of their lineup. And without that ability to outscore your problems, your margin for error increases dramatically. When the Oilers were winning all of those games between the end of November and the middle of January, they were doing so with a really strong penalty kill. They were playing really, really sound defensive hockey. Their goaltending did not have to do a whole lot. And when you are only asking Stuart Skinner to be a guy on the team, you're going to be relatively happy with the results. It's where we're at now. It's a self-defeating cycle. So it's kind of like the chicken or the egg. It's not just that Stuart Skinner and the team is struggling. They're both struggling simultaneously, and it's perfectly reasonable to say Stuart Skinner needs to be better, but the team in front of him also needs to be better. Those are not mutually exclusive ideas. You can hold both of those opinions concurrently the way I do. I don't expect a lot from Skinner. He's not that far below league average for save percentage and goals against, if I remember correctly. I think going into tonight, he was at 898 save percentage. League average save percentage this year so far is 901. So we're talking about 0.03 of a percent. That's not a significant ratio of goals to shots on goal. 3/1000 is a very, very, very small fraction. But when you are in a funk like this, and it's entirely fair to call this a prolonged funk now, because when you start looking through these box scores, these are ugly. These are ugly, lopsided box scores. Tonight against Anaheim, you lost 6-2. You beat Carolina 3-1, relatively, I won't say easy, but relatively doable game. You lost 4-3 to Florida. You lost 4-1 to Tampa. 7-3 to Washington, 6-3 to Philadelphia, 5-4 to Colorado. The most goals you've scored in a game in 2 weeks is 3. This is a team that is supposed to be high powered, that is supposed to score a ton of goals. And I talk about it incessantly on Locked On Oilers here. If this is your first episode, hi, welcome. But secondly, the Oilers are built to score their problems away. When their goaltending is torpedoing them the way it is right now, the Oilers are supposed to be able to score enough that their goaltending, even if it's having a bad night, it's not going to sink them. Right now, if you look throughout this lineup, and McDavid looked better tonight, definitely his best game since coming back from the Four Nations break, but other than Connor and Leon and Bouchard occasionally, I don't feel great about anyone's game right now. That little bit of juice Vasily Podkolzin had seems to have dissipated. Zach Hyman, Victor Arvidsson, Jeff Skinner can't even crack the lineup. Janmark, Henrique, Connor Brown, Corey Perry. None of those guys are chipping in with that occasional goal that was a foundational part of that prolonged stretch of good hockey from late November through mid-January. It just feels like there's so much working against the Oilers right now. And I said this I said this when the losing streak got to 5. I said, when you are losing, everything that feels bad about your team feels impossibly incorrectable. It feels like you cannot do a single thing right, and those games become car crashes in slow motion. They are waiting for the inevitable back-breaking goal that's going to break you down and frankly just wear away at your spirit. And if you are a guy on this team who knows what the expectations are, if you go and look right now at our friends on FanDuel's website, the Oilers are still the betting favorite to win the Stanley Cup, in spite of the fact they've lost 6 of their last 7 games and have a 300 points percentage since the start of February. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable for a team that has the aspirations the Oilers do. Are there mistakes here? Yeah. It's very easy to critique the roster decisions with knowing what you know now. In an ideal world, you would say, I think they probably just let Skinner and Arvidsson stay in free agency. I think they keep Broberg and Holloway. I think they look for another speedy bottom 6 guy to kind of fill out that lineup spot. I think they try and get a little bit younger and cheaper and trading Cody Ceci and trying to get somebody a little closer to their mid-20s as opposed to their late 20s or early 30s for that spot. Because knowing what we know now, the fit has not been seamless for Arvidsson or for Jeff Skinner. I mean, Jeff Skinner can't even crack the lineup. Jeff Skinner, who's been a 30-goal guy in the NHL, can't even break the Oilers lineup. And this is a team that can't score. When you are talking about a team that is struggling to create offensively, where you are playing several forwards a night who haven't scored goals in weeks, what does that say that someone like Jeff Skinner, who has 30-goal seasons and has always been an above-average shooter and has above-average foot speed, what does it say if that guy can't crack your lineup? What does that say about the direction of your team and the decision making? Sure, you want to care about defense, but right now, the Oilers couldn't stop the Mighty Ducks from the movie, with Emilio Estevez. They couldn't stop them, let alone the Anaheim Ducks. So with that in mind, we're going to take one more break on today's show, and we're going to talk a little bit about the mindset of trying to get out of this funk, why it probably feels a lot worse than it actually is, and tie a bow on this loss and try and set the tone going towards their next game. Be right back. Make sure to stay tuned to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. And thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we walk through another frustrating loss. And I took a break during that. I took a break during that break to go and look at the post-game comments. And I think what Corey Perry said is extremely illuminating. And I'm going to read it to you verbatim so that way I don't misquote him. But I want to make sure I say this correctly. One mistake and it's in the back of our net. We got to start from the net out. You can't put it any more clearly than that. I like when a team is honest, and I've said this a lot in regards to Stan Bowman and the posture of the front office over the last week, that it's not in their benefit to let us know their plans, because if they do, that only makes their job more difficult. Because if they say, well, we want to go out and improve the goaltending room, that messes with Stuart Skinner's confidence and Calvin Pickard's confidence. That puts an expectation on the front office from the public that, oh, well, they're going to go out and get a goalie. So whoever they get, he's got to be better than what we already have. Otherwise, they're not good at their jobs. They're not making good decisions. And I think you hearing on the intermission report that the Oilers want to give Skinner some runway to build himself up, I think that's an amicable and an amicable idea that I can appreciate where it's coming from. I think it's rooted in a good place. The Oilers have a loyalty to Skinner because of the way he's bailed them out. 2 years ago when Jack Campbell kind of derailed the start of their season, and last year they wanted to try and give Campbell one more chance, and ultimately Campbell ended up in the AHL and that's really where it comes from. And also the fact the Oilers just don't have the money. You also heard dollars in, dollars out. And I loosely toyed with the idea of trying to find a change of scenery trade with someone on the Islanders, whether that's Kyle Palmieri or Jean-Gabriel Pageau. I don't think Pageau really fits as far as cost or duration, being that he's got more years remaining on his contract. But finding a way to offload Arvidsson or Jeff Skinner or Evander Kane would go a long way in finding a way to improve this roster. And that's really my goal here. If I'm going into my Wednesday, I've got 2 days to improve this roster ahead of the trade deadline. We probably aren't getting a goalie in here that we're going to feel good about. I mentioned when I did the trade board the other day, Vitek Vanacek, who was held out of the lineup by the Sharks on Tuesday night for trade reasons. Would you feel that much better if it was Vanacek instead of Calvin Pickard, and Skinner and Vanacek were oscillating starts back down the backstretch of this regular season? I wouldn't. Vanacek's numbers were even worse than Skinner's. And yeah, some of that is because the Sharks are probably the worst defensive team in the entire NHL. You would think on a team like the Oilers that on occasion plays good defense can get better production out of him. But at the same time, I don't know. I really don't know. It feels like we are reaching an inflection point and a tipping point for the confidence of this team. Coming out of the Four Nations break, I expected to see a gradual ramp up and the Oilers really kind of settling into whatever their team was going to look like lineup-wise, and then Stan Bowman finding ways to improve the roster along the margins. They were never going to be in the market to go get a Brock Nelson, to get a Brock Besser. They were never going to be able to go out and get one of the marquee top six guys. It was always going to be adding along the edges. You see that in Trent Frederick, a specialized guy, strong on the forecheck, cycles the puck well, hits everything that moves, a bit of a rat after the whistle, something the Oilers don't really have in their lineup presently, and something I think that would help them. And look, you guys know I've been doing the show a little less than a year. We're going on 11 months now that we're in March, but I'm not a big proponent of the after the whistle shenanigans. I don't think there's a ton of value in having guys like Frederick or Evander Kane be pains in the butts and try and goad teams into fights and that type of thing, just because it's not worth it. You don't want to take players who are good off the ice. Frederick, for all of his after the whistle posturing, he's a decent enough skater. He hits hard. He forechecks hard. The Oilers need that. They don't have a lot of that in their lineup. Once you get past Podkolzin, they don't really have aggressive forecheckers who can play as puck retrievers for stars, and their stars need the puck more. The Oilers tonight did not have the puck nearly enough. And again, I said it in the first segment. I'll reiterate it now. They had chances. This game could have been closer, but with the goaltending the way it was and the defense as leaky as it was, I don't think you can feel good about any component of this game tonight. Sure, the special teams were good, but who cares? You lost 6-2. And I'll leave you guys with this. This will be the final thought for today's show, and I'm going to try and expand on it best I can because it's still developing as I'm speaking. Right now, it feels like anything that can go wrong for the Oilers is going wrong. They are unable to make the most routine of saves. They are getting their goalies caught out of position, giving up really bad rebounds, falling over, and giving up open nets. Their defense is amicably trying to break John Klingberg in on the fly with a month to determine if he's going to be in their playoff rotation or not ahead of Friday's deadline. And he just does not look the part. And that could change with more ice time, but I struggle to imagine a discernible or big jump from Klingberg's play over the course of the final 20 or so regular season games, just because this might just be what he is at this point. He just does not look functionally comfortable, and you're playing him you're playing him in a non-unreasonable role. Of the defensemen tonight, he had the fourth most minutes at 18:30. Ekholm was at 17:59. Emerson was at 17:30. You probably needed a little bit more from the bottom half of your lineup, and I'll give you guys a metaphor here. I'm going to grab 2 bottles of water so I have props for you. I'm not a prop comic. I'm not Carrot Top, but I do want to give you guys a visual to think about. So you see how one bottle of water has more water than the other because I don't finish them and I leave them around my room. When you are playing a team that is winning the game against you, you have more work to do. There's more water to get done. The problem is when you are trailing, that other team, they're going to squeeze you and they're going to make it harder and they're going to make it more challenging for you to mount a comeback. Why is it more difficult? Well, because you need to score 3, 4, 5 goals consecutively. That means if you give up one defensively, you got to start over all the way again. And the Oilers even mentioned that they got mentioned on the Sportsnet broadcast, which is as team friendly as it gets. And look, I got no qualms with the guys doing their jobs. The people who watch the Sportsnet broadcast know what they are getting. They want team-friendly coverage that does a reasonable job of highlighting the players, of giving flavor to their persons, helping you get to know them a little bit better. And they're not going to be outwardly critical unless they absolutely have to. I will say, real quick, it was good to see Oscar Klefbom on the broadcast today. Really, you always, those are the ones that linger with you, the guys who could have been something. And Oscar Klefbom was a really solid NHL defenseman. And it's unfair that his body let him down because he's only 31. He could very well still be playing on this team right now. I'd be very curious to see if the Oilers would have kept Darnell Nurse 3 years ago on that big extension, if they still had Klefbom in the rotation as far as left-handed defensemen go. But that will just about do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers after a 6-2 loss at the hands of the Anaheim Ducks. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. What we'll talk about, I'm not sure yet. We will see if there are more trades between now and then. If there are trades at any point during the day on Wednesday, there will be another reaction episode that goes out as soon as the trade is finalized and all of the details come out, like the Trent Frederick one. I will talk to you guys real soon. Until then, let's go Oilers.